James Gunn, he's given some clarity on the DCU.
Has he?
Because obviously everyone's kind of, is it canon? Do I need to go see this one? Because at the start of the year, you said I need to go see it, and I went to see it, and nothing happened in it, James. So can you
Yeah.
have some clarity on the future of the DCU? So this is what James has said. Nothing is in canon until Creature Commandos next year. A sort of aperitif to the DCU, and then a deeper dive into the universe with Superman Legacy after that. It's a very human drive to want to understand everything all the time, but I think it's okay to be confused on what's happening in the DCU since no one has seen anything from the DCU yet. I don't think anyone knows I don't think you know what's going on, James. Warner
Yeah.
Brothers come in every other week and they're like, this week can you go out and say The Flash is the best movie ever made and Aquaman's 2 is definitely going to be important going forward. But yeah, so he said, and yes, some actors will be playing characters they've played in other stories, and some plot points might be consistent with plot points from dozens of films, shows, and animated projects that have come from DC in the past, but nothing is canon until CC and Legacy. And then he went on to clarify, Xolo Maridueña will continue playing Blue Beetle in the DCU, as Viola Davis will Amanda Waller, and John Cena will Peacemaker. And they've actually announced 40 minutes before we pressed record, Peacemaker 2 is in the works. So, what are your thoughts on that, Greg? What the hell are you thinking?
I'm thinking that he's saying I don't need to watch Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So that's a tank. I don't think this really, because everyone's been saying he's providing clarity, and at first you're like, okay, so it's essentially a reboot, and then he says some other shit, and you're like, but wait a minute,
Yeah.
now I'm back to being really confused about this, especially with Peacemaker. Will they call it Peacemaker season 2, or are they going to do essentially is Daredevil Born Again Daredevil season 4? Because it sounds like it's not, but it also sounds like it is, and I guess we won't know till it's out, right? Are they going to kind of do that method? Because there's so much about Peacemaker that was so tied to the Suicide Squad, which was very much part of the DCEU, and they even have in Peacemaker season 1 the Justice League cast show up, which had Aquaman and the Flash and all that. So to me, if you're just doing Peacemaker season 2, it makes it more confusing. And then considering that Blue Beetle, announcing who's still going to remain, I feel like you can get away with Viola Davis easily. To me, that's like a J.K. Simmons situation with J. Jonah Jameson. Like, yeah, she's perfect as Amanda Waller. Just keep her. That makes the most sense. Just keep her. Why not? But Cholo and John Cena, that's the part of it where when you say stuff like that, I just kind of get more confused because you can't help but ponder. You might as well not say something, because then it just does throw a wrench in everything that you're ultimately saying when he is saying nothing is canon. Or is he intending to say that the canon will be clear once Creature Commandos comes out next year? That's when you'll understand what we're doing.
Well, comics have done this in the past. The New 52, that's probably the one in most recent memory where they were like, we're resetting everything, but what's going to happen is we're basically going to condense every major story from DC history into a 5-year span. We're putting that in
Yes.
place. So all of these things like The Killing Joke, Nightfall, just looking at my comics to try and remember stuff. Yeah, No Man's Land, stuff like that all got condensed into a big 5-year space, and it was said this happens over that time. Some of the stuff that you love and know is canon. Some of the stuff like Batman Shaman, that's not canon anymore. Don't worry about it. Batman Year One, great story, not canon anymore. It's 0 year this time. So I think what they're doing is copying that model where they're basically taking some things that worked from the DCEU and the things that didn't, and just saying, don't worry about that, mate. Don't worry about Shazam 2. We know you didn't see it. Personally, when it comes to building a universe, though I understand the principle of it, I don't think it's a good way to take things. And I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be this black cloud of the DCEU hanging over the DCU going forward. Because let's be honest, the last 4 movies, whatever, haven't been popular. No one's really bothered seeing them. Hardcore fans have, but in terms of general audiences, they've not bothered. And people who don't fully get, into this stuff, they're just going to see characters like maybe Zachary Levi Shazam showing up in Superman Legacy or something, and they're just going to think it's tied into that old universe and just be like, oh, well, I didn't really like that stuff, so I'm not going to bother seeing it. I've always said hard reboot is the way to go when it comes to films. I know a lot
Definitely.
of people are being like, well, this is how it works in comics. This isn't comics, mate, and it's a totally different medium.
The cinematic visual medium is so different. It's so different.
Yeah, a comic takes like I don't know, maybe $500 to make once you've paid the. I don't know how much inflation's caused it to be, but let's say back in the day, they're very cheap to make in comparison to a film. You take a big shot at a film, you market it, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not the same as just doing a comic book universe, and there needs to be more planning, more thought about how this is going to play out. And just, I feel like they're making the wrong step every step of the way. Sure, Amanda Waller and so on, that they can come across, but I just don't think it should be tied to that old universe. And I really do think that hard reboot is the way to go. I feel passionate about that. I feel like that meme of Walt from Breaking Bad when he's stuck in the Jeep shouting and no one can hear him. I feel like that. It's like, how can you not see that there isn't the goodwill behind the DCEU to justify bringing that into your new universe? There's not the people and fan base there that are going to help to catapult it, and the people who aren't fans, they're not going to jump on board because they're just going to see it as a continuation of the DCEU and just things that they're doing strategically, like starting off with Creature Commandos. That's not unfortunately, if you're building a live action universe, to me you don't start off with an animated movie. Something like Spider-Verse, sure, it's been a great success, but that was never pushed as being like, we're making a Spider-Man universe over at Sony. It was very much just like, oh, here's a little animated Spider-Man movie. Oh, what, it's done well, yeah, we're going to make more sequels, it's going to become something. And I think just, yeah, everything kind of seems like up in the air at the moment. The fact that Aquaman 2 is not even out yet and they're already coming out and being like, nothing that doesn't
Doesn't
matter, mate,
matter.
until Creature Commandos. It's like, well, yeah, I don't even care that much about Creature Commandos. I'm a big DC fan. Don't think I'd ever read a Creature Commandos story ever in my whole life. Think it's the wrong way to start a universe. Just cut the cord, let it go, mate. It's over. You had an all right run. The audience is telling you they're not interested in these movies or characters. Start again with Superman Legacy and just go from there. Stuff will work out a lot better instead of you trying to retroactively tie things back into the past and be like, well, Wonder Woman 84, throw that Blu-ray away, but keep your Wonder Woman Blu-ray because that one matters, but just forget that there's a link to Bruce Wayne from Batman v Superman in it and just throw that away, but also throw the Man of Steel one away because Superman
Yeah.
Legacy is the first one. Just
Well,
didn't work for me.
a lot of people were, like it. We're trying to liken this, and speaking about keeping some of it and then, erasing others to like the new 52, right? Where you had an event, and then after that event, multiverse and canon shenanigans took place, and then now some of this remains and other things no. The, it doesn't sound like they have an event in place in order to establish that. A lot of us were under the impression that it sounded like maybe that's what the Flash movie was going to do.
Yeah,
In
well, that's
fact,
what they wanted to happen.
and I think James Gunn even said some shit, right? I thought in his announcement he said something that really had us all think, okay, then they are doing that. That it's gonna. I think he said
Well,
it's gonna be the reset or something. If I'm not mistaken,
yeah, to be fair, the Flash does work as a reset. It
does it?
obviously brings across George Clooney, but
Yes.
it does change certain things out and alter the universe slightly. Slightly. Some things are the same, some things are changed. Just what James is going for. But it wasn't a success. It was one of the biggest flops of all time, which is so, yeah. If you're an executive in Hollywood, you need to start panicking and being like, maybe we shouldn't be using this as a plot device.
Yeah. I have no idea. Um, I don't know.
I think unfortunately, James Gunn doing this strategy of saying none of this shit matters. It's not working. Hype. The MCU, sure, it's had its midpoints. It's had lots of drops since Endgame. I mean,
But
let's be
Feige
honest.
stays
The
strong.
MCU, yeah, has never kind of recaptured the goodwill. Maybe around No Way Home, um,
Mhm.
but it's been diminishing returns for a lot of time. I feel like Loki will get good positive conversations around it, but Feige, he always tries to sell the movies are important. It's always like, well, um, Black Widow, it's introducing the first female Marvel superhero solo film, and the Eternals. Oh, this is introducing the most diverse team, and the Celestials are going to be a big thing going forward. And there's going to be some people introducing the post-credit scene. Shang-Chi is a very important character introducing the Ten Rings. He's not out here going, "Oh, none of this shit matters until Secret Wars, mate. Just sod all this. It's none of it's canon." What do you mean we've got a movie coming out next month? Um, it feels like they're trying to build something, and even the slate that James Gunn announced, it didn't really feel like it was building up to something. You know what I mean? It felt like they just got some comics, slapped them down on the ground, and were like, "Oh, that's coming out. The Authority's coming
Yeah.
out. Green Lantern's coming out." It's not building towards something, and I think just unfortunately, the way the internet is, the conversation with them not doing a hard reboot, it will be stuff like, "You kept your wife, but you got rid of Henry Cavill," and I'm not accusing him of that. But it will just provide this black cloud over everything where, because James Gunn uses his friends and family in a lot of things, they'll see him as scrapping beloved characters and actors to bring in people who are just his friends. And I know whenever we bring up that conversation, there'll be people who are like, well, Martin Scorsese works with the same actors all the time. Christopher Nolan uses the same actors all the time. The difference is that Nolan and Scorsese, when they're doing this, they're creating original films with original characters that people don't necessarily have that attachment to. Whereas when you've got a character like Batman or someone who's been around in the comics for 30 years, putting your friends and family in, it's going to rub people the wrong way. I think who already have that theory that James Gunn just casts his friends and family, they're just going to use that to be like, well, that he's not inventing new characters for them. And I think I just feel like it's going to create such a black cloud. And we know that they're planning to do 10 years of stuff, right?
Mhm.
Gal Gadot, she's playing Wonder Woman. Does Gal Gadot really want to be playing Wonder Woman from 2016 to 2033 or whatever? You know what I mean? I'm just screaming at it. I think Marvel and DC have recently had this issue with, they want the audience to meet them where they're at, whereas DC and Marvel, they need to meet the audience where they're at. Like Echo,
Well put.
you can tell they're having a nightmare about that behind the scenes. And from what I've heard, just everything that's happening with it, they're really just, they've hit a point where they're like, We don't even know if we want to release it." It got delayed to January. We've heard rumors that it was originally however many episodes. They've even cut one of them. They're dropping it all on one day to just rip the band-aid and get it out the way. It feels like they're trying to tell us that that's what we need to see. And that they're spending all this money on these projects, and you're not meeting the audience. You're expecting the audience to come to you because that's what they love, and I just don't feel the audience love it anymore. And I think Loki. I think Loki's going to be successful, but coming out and saying this stuff like, "Oh yeah, we don't watch that stuff." Yeah, we're doing a new thing. Just come see it. Yeah, it doesn't strike me as the correct strategy to take. Everyone's entitled to their opinion on it. Obviously, I might be wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong. But yeah, being a DC fan sure is tough.
Especially now. Is Creature Commandos a show or a movie?
I think it's a show.
And it's gonna be like an
Yeah,
HBO show? Is that what they're doing?
yeah.
Or
I
a
mean, no
Max
one's
show?
gonna.
I don't feel like people are
Yeah,
gonna
so
watch it. I
we don't. So it's a
I'll
TV
watch it.
series. I don't
Yeah.
even know if I will. I might binge it. But so it's going to drop in 2024. It's going to be part of Chapter One: Gods and Monsters, and it's going to have Amanda Waller assembling a Black Ops team called the Creature Commandos. Um, yeah. So, oof, Like, do you think that is going to capture the audience's imagination and make everyone jump onto the DCU, being like, "Oh, I've got to go over to Max to get things in place"? I think it's just kind of one of those projects where they're saying it's attached to it, but if you don't watch it, you're not going to get penalized for not watching it.
I mean, you have two camps you gotta win over here. Probably more than two. Because you got your hardcores who will still, even if you're not liking the DC universe, whatever it is now, if you're like Shazam and everything that came out this year, even if you're not super into it, but you're still like, but it's DC, so I'm gonna watch it. You got that camp out there of the people who are always gonna go watch it, and then you got, well, the bottom line is he needs to create a sense of unity for audiences, right? So maybe Creature Commandos, if that's really great, that could win over the hardcores. If the hardcore people who love DC are like, oh wait, this is giving me a good sense of sort of the vibe and but I feel like the Suicide Squad kind of already, like his version of the Suicide Squad is already giving me an idea of what a James Gunn DC universe might feel like. And I love the Suicide Squad. I still think it's a fantastic film.
Yeah,
And
it's great.
when I hear Creature Commandos, like it sounds like animated Suicide Squad to me from everything that I hear about it. I'm sure there'll be differences, but from the initial pitch, it sounds like animated Suicide Squad. And then Superman Legacy has to be the thing that goes, all right, hardcores are going, Creature Commandos is good. Now it's Superman Legacy. You got to win over people who haven't given a shit, the general audiences. You got to win over all those people, and you got to win over, the hardcores as well. And then of course you've had the, I don't know how much smaller the Snyder camp of people who, cry out their anguish over what's happened with, Zack Snyder, Henry Cavill, and Ben Affleck. I don't know how much that fervor has dwindled.
I wouldn't say it has. I mean, yeah, I still see it all the time. People still having arguments about it. I feel
Yes,
like the DC fan base is just extremely divided.
it's in and that's what I mean is like the goal here has to be create a sense of unity in some way. There's going to be people who are obviously never going to be happy, and people who might not ever be able to let go. And I think the main so the question is, will Creature Commandos and Superman Legacy, where he's placing a lot of his cards on here, will that be good enough to win over all these people? Because I think there's room for more confusion to come down the road. Admittedly, in the beginning, when first announcing the Elseworlds of the DC universe, like, oh, Joker will be Elseworlds, like that makes sense. I feel like that was already clear to people, right? That was something that was uniquely clear to people right away. That is its own thing, and I think even general audiences understood that. And then the Batman, saying that's going to be Elseworlds camp, and then they have other Elseworlds ideas in mind as well. Initially, that's really exciting to me, but when you think about how much Batman there have been so far, will that create some sense of confusion? And if not confusion, will it diminish interest, in wanting to see Batman in the DCU when we're already invested in the Batman via Elseworlds Robert Pattinson journey? Will audiences want to see both truly? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the other question I think you got to ask yourselves. Like maybe it isn't a question of like, I'm sure they'll understand, but will they be interested? I think like the Flash movie is a great example of that. Like they've leaned so much on Batman in the marketing for that, and people didn't really care for it, and nostalgia did not win for it. And at that point, I was like, man, we just saw like Michael Keaton, we just saw freaking Robert Pattinson, we had Ben Affleck, and now we got Michael Keaton here.
And George Clooney,
And George Clooney. Let's not
3
forget
Batmen
about the
in 1
Jorge.
movie.
I think it does get to a point where I am a bit worried about that element because I actually love the idea of having two separate Batmen. Of you got Robert Pattinson, the Matt Reeves world. I think that's awesome. a very specific type of world, and you can have a really unique vision that is not tied to, some timeline of continuity versus um versus what they're going to be doing with Batman the Brave and the Bold, where you can get a very different side of Batman. It could probably feel a little bit more animated in its own way, because he's got the kid there. He's got Damian Wayne with him. So there's something that really does excite me about having both sides of it. And that's the part of me that goes, okay, maybe that'll help audiences be interested in it. Like, okay, you got the young Batman with Robert Pattinson in a darker, more brooding version, and then you got this other Batman here. But will they be? I guess the question is will there be too much Batman happening where people just only want to invest their time in one? So there's room for concern here. I think there's reasonable room for concern. And a lot of this is obviously theoretical. We don't really know the answers yet. And James Gunn keeps saying that by the end of Superman Legacy, we should know what's really going on. But yeah, I'm really not 100% certain about that.
Yeah. I think, to be fair to James Gunn, to be completely fair to him, he has been handed a very bad situation where they were still pushing out 4 movies on whilst he was working on a new universe. And I think, that we've seen how badly the box offices of those have done. I'm sure it was like just on Shazam, Blue Beetle, and The Flash, Warner Brothers lost about $1 billion, and he's been handed this thing that's not very good. He's trying to launch out of it and pull it together. And again, I think I actually go to the other extreme of just going beyond just doing a hard reboot. I actually think DC need to take a chunk of years out, like maybe 5 years, just take a break, put a lid on this universe, take some time out, regroup, recast, and start afresh once Goodwill's had time to build back up, instead of just doing what they're doing, which is like going from one failed universe and trying to almost repair it. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's such a difficult task, and I think more times than not, you're going to fail, and it's going to have a worse effect long term, because if this universe crashes, then how big of a break are you going to have to take before you reboot the next one?
Right.
You can fail on a one universe, take time out, and do it again down the line. But if you fail, try and repair it, try and build it back up, and that still crashes, then it's like you're just stuck, because it's going to be you're going to have to wait such a long time for audiences to get a gap where they no longer associate your films with those 2 failures to then build it back up. And it's so difficult, the job he's got ahead of him. I wouldn't want to do it. Well, I would, because I'll probably become like a millionaire in a couple of months, but I wouldn't really want to do what he's got ahead of him. And I think, it would sound like a broken record. And I know I'm coming across very negative. I am passionate about this, and I feel that there's clear signposts about what needs to be done. And rather than acknowledging that, they're still thinking they're living 5 years ago, when superhero movies were $1 billion blockbusters guaranteed. And I just think it's going to lead to more trouble down the line, attaching yourself to this when there's not the fan base are kind of sick of it, and they're telling you it by the box office returns. If these movies were making millions and millions and millions of dollars, then I could totally understand why you'd want to be attached to that. But I think the mid reviews, the box office returns, the general love for these versions of the heroes in general, it's not there, and I think it's a mistake building it off that.
I agree. I agree with you, Paul. But
Yeah.
watch us love
So,
Superman Legacy and Creature Commandos when it comes out, and we'll be like, James Gunn, our savior, Jesus Gunn over
well,
here.
that is my hope, and I hope that 3 years from now, when I'm giving Superman Legacy a 10 out of 10, people clip this on Twitter and they're like, but look, we found this old clip of you saying James Gunn's a slag, and we're playing it to you because you're meeting him tomorrow for an interview or something. He's
Well,
decided to bring you along, and it was just all to humiliate me, and because I've been talking crap about him. But yeah, he might be a genius. This might be the master strategy that catapults DC ahead of Marvel, but we'll have to see. But yeah, I want to end on a positive note.